Hello, I wanted to talk today about Genesis and the power of that book, and how really Genesis, the first 11, 12 chapters, explains a lot about what's going on in the world today. I believe here in America we live in one of the freest nations in the world. I believe God has blessed this country. I believe if we believe in Him, He will lead us. Yet there are some today that still participate in division and hate. And sometimes it boils down just to the simple color of our skin. I'd encourage people to look at Genesis chapter 11. I'm going to read through it today and talk about the Tower of Babel and explain how God has set up this world to be one race, and that is the human race. And how we migrated to different parts of the world, yet God is still visible today in the world around us and even in our language. Look at Genesis with me for a second. Genesis says the whole earth was in one language. Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. And it came to pass as they journeyed east, they dwelt on the plain of Shinar. And they said, let's go make brick. And if you read on to the story, it's the story of the Tower of Babel. How they built a tower in Genesis 11, 1 through 5. And then the Lord looked down and said, look, the people have become one. God's patience and omnipresence once again was wearing out. He said the people have become one and imagine things in their own minds of what to do. And here we see the name of the tower was Babel. And there was one language, and the Lord came down and scattered them and caused them to speak in different languages. And thus we have the Tower of Babel in that story. And it really explains a lot about the world today. The Heavenly Father's fingerprint is in the world today. And there is but one race, the human race. And I would encourage you to tell some soul today or tomorrow about this wonderful story. In Genesis 11, Genesis 11, 3 and 4, the Babylon soil there is still celebrated today for its archaeological materials. This area has some of the best material in the world for brick, and asphalt is found boiling up from this area. And it's in the neighborhood of the Babylon Dead Sea, or the neighborhood of Babylon is the Dead Sea. So the Lord scattered them abroad upon the face of the earth, Genesis chapter 11, 1 through 9. And the world became divided, speaking different languages. One of the languages we want to focus on today is the Chinese language and its origins. It's a simple language, as is the Hebrew language. Stripped from its vowels and prefixes, suffix, postfixes, and the combinations there, we can boil it down to some interesting characters that represent the people of this country. For example, one of the words for perfect is people plus 2, reckoning back to the Garden of Eden. The Heavenly Father, in all His grace, made a perfect race in the Garden of Eden. One race, Adam and Eve. And they had all the characteristics of God, because God said, let us make man in our own image. And that's what we see today, one race. We might have different colors and different ethnicities, but we're all one race, the human race. And we shouldn't divide and fight amongst ourselves. The Creator, or as the Hebrew language calls him, Elohim, made man perfect. He made him with a perfect set of genes. And here in the example, X, Y would represent the male in genetics, and XX, the female. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, I would imagine, had a colorful family, because when you have dominant genes, you have darker skin color, for example, and the lighter skin color, or we might even call albino, would be that person with less pigmentation. And all these things are from genetic combinations. After the fall of man, or the disobedience or rebellion of man in the Garden of Eden, we see the perfection of man beginning to change. And in the righteousness of God, he realized that man was not following his will. And here we go back to the garden, from the Garden of Eden to the Tower of Babylon. We see that man imagined things on his own without the mind of God. And isn't that what also we see reflected in our society today? Oftentimes, man imagines too many things without God. And God there in Genesis chapter 11 again looked and behold that they had one language, and they were imagining too many things together. And so he caused them to be scattered in verse 8. And the people of the world from this point on became divided and spoke different languages. We see the righteousness of God versus the power of their prince, the prince of darkness, who causes destruction, wickedness, strife, disobedience. We have a beautiful family of people in the world today, yet many are still fighting over simple colors. But God is also present in our language today, and he reminds us that he is also present in our lives, in this world around us. And the thing that we're going to consider here today is how he influenced the Chinese language. You see, after the flood, and according to the Bible, around 23 BC, the righteous sons of Noah and their families, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, repopulated the earth. And the Asians, partly made up of the Chinese, some say today are likely descendants of Shem, based on what the Bible reveals in chapter 10 of Genesis, often referred to as the Tables of Nations. After the dispersion of the Tower of Babel, it seems that the families of Japheth and his descendants went west from the Tower of Babel and north. And Ham and his family went south and southwest, but Shem and his family generally went east, which is towards the area of China. And it seems that some of the family actually went over the Himalaya mountain chain and became secluded from the rest of the world because they had the mountains on one side and the ocean on the other side. So after this migration for at least 1,000 years, they were pretty much on their own. The important thing to remember here is they weren't influenced by outside religions. They were able to work within themselves and create their own language. And this language is unique as it involves symbols. And these symbols kept in their minds the history from where they came from. All the facts remembered from this period, we would expect to find evidence, just like we do in a global flood, in the Tower of Babel. We see different things in the Bible, especially Genesis, in the world today. What greater impact one would have is to see the impact of the language in God's presence. For example, in the Chinese language, in this form that they write, this ancient form, the word tower here is made up of dust plus grass plus the people with one mouth. Remember, as we just read in the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11, they were all speaking in one language. As we look in the beginning, they used dirt, what they call asphalt, grass, and they made a tower. And this is reflected even today in their language. And over here in the right corner, the arrow shows united. These people were all with one, and with the dust and the grass, they made a tower. But the Lord came down